So in last class, I think we have started with state concept in React, right?
Yeah.
So basically we have understood in last class what is state and why we have to use state. Okay. So what is state means? State is a variable in JavaScript where we can store some data. In the same way, why we have to use state means to make UI dynamic. Or we can say in more simple words, if you want to say, to add dynamic data in the UI. So why we have to use statements? Using state, we can add dynamic data in the UI. Or in other ways, how we can frame this? So that in more easier way you can understand. So using state, we can make the data of the UI dynamic. That is also how we can frame. So using state, we can make data of the UI dynamic. So making the data of the UI dynamic means you can keep changing the data whenever you want in that UI. That is the main purpose of your state concept. Is my voice not audible, guys?
It's visible. I mean, it's audible, sir.
Okay. Dikshit, can you check from your end? It's audible, I think, everyone. Okay. Yeah. So now let's learn how to create this state variable. How to create state variable. So to create this state variable, ReactJS provides us one predefined function called useState. ReactJS is providing us one predefined function called useState. So what is useState means? Technically, it is called hook. But right now, we don't know what is hook. So let's not use that term. So what is useState? UseState is a predefined function. It is a predefined function in JavaScript. It's a predefined function in JavaScript. So React is providing us this function called useState. Whenever we call this function, it returns one array. It returns one array. And in that array, the first element will be your variable. That is your state variable, in which you can store some data. And your second element will be one setter function. It means whenever we call useState, it returns one array, and that array contains exactly two elements. The first element will be variable. Second element will be your function. It will be your function. So the first element will be variable, and second element is one predefined function. One function. So how to create state variable means, so directly we won't create any state variable. We just call this function. Internally, React will take care of creating that variable and providing that variable through this array. So using useState, we can create state variable. So whenever you call this function called useState, it returns one array. It returns one array. This array contains two elements. And those two elements are, the first element will be your state variable. And second element is one setter function. We call it as a setter function. Now inside this variable, we can store some data. So initial data, if you want to store anything inside the state variable, then you can pass your initial data as an argument to this use state. If you pass any data as an argument to this use state, that data will store inside the state variable. And if you want to update this state variable, for that React is providing us this setter function. Using this setter function, we can update this state variable data. So how to create state variable? For that, we have to use here use state function. So what is use state? It is one predefined function in JavaScript. So whenever you call this function, it returns one array, and that array contains exactly two elements. First element is always variable. Second element is always function. So let's see practically now. So let's go to last session application. So I will open this application in our Visual Studio Code. Now if I start my development server, now we are able to access this last session components. So now what I will do, I will go to my app.jsx file. I will remove this header and I will remove this footer from here. And I will remove this h1 and footer from here. So that now inside our app, only header component will be available. Now instead of showing header component, I will do one thing. I will directly import here nav component. And I will remove this header also. And here, instead of header, I will directly render my nav component. So same UI you have. So I'm not rendering this header component and footer component. So now if you want, you can delete it. Right now I don't want, so I will delete it. I will remove footer. I will remove my header also. So now if you observe, inside your component, you have only one folder called nav. Inside that nav folder, you have two files. Now inside this components sub folder, inside this components folder, I will create one sub folder called state concept. Inside this state concept folder, I will create one file called count.jsx. And for this count, I will create one CSS file called count.css. Now inside count.jsx file, I will create one component called count. In this, I will add one title. I will say counter app. And I will export this component from this file. Now for this component, if you want to add any CSS, you can add it. So I'm adding here a class name. So instead of using class attribute, in React, we use class name. So class name is nothing but your class attribute only. So here I am adding something like count. I will integrate my CSS file. Now let's go to this count. Let's select. And let me just add some basic styles. So I will decrease the width to 500 pixel. Let me add some padding, 50 pixel. Text align, we will add center. And box shadow, some 0, 0, 10 pixel. Black. And margin from top 50 pixel. And from left, right, auto. So I have just assigned width property, decreased the width of my div, added some padding, text align made center, added box shadow, margin. Now I can go to my app.jsx. I can import my count component here, and I can render that count component after this navbar. So right now, if I go back here, it looks something like this counter app. So maybe for box shadow, we can add some other color. So here I will add blue. So it looks something like this. And for this text color, inside my count, whatever H1 I have, I think we have H1 only, right? Yeah. Its color also, I want to be blue. So we got here counter app. Now after this H1, I want to take one H3 element. And here I want to add some content like count value is, and inside this, I want to take one span tag. And initially I want to make it 0. And for this span, I will add some class. I will say text, or here something like count value. To this span, I want to add some other color here. So I can select that count value. And let's add some color like blue. If I go back here, we got something like this. And let's add some margin. Margin top, I will say 30 pixel. So here, okay, not for this, we should add that for the H3 element. So here we will say dot count H3, and for 3H3, we will add it. So that some space we got. It now this 30 pixel looks so much. Maybe we can go with 20 pixel. So here I got something like a count value. Now my requirement is I need here one button called increase count. So we have one button called increase count. For this button also, we have to add some margin. So here, instead of this, can we make it 0 pixel? So we got some space here. Now here we have this count. Now my requirement is very simple. If I click on this button, this count should increase. If I click one time, count should be 1. Again, if I click, count should be 2. Again, if I click, count should be 3. Again, if I click, count should be 4. Again, if I click, count should be 5. So how many times I will click on this button, that many times this count should increase. Means this data should keep changing. Right now we are displaying 0. After clicking the button, it should be 1. Again, if I click, it should be 2. Again, if I click, it should be 3. It means in this UI, this part is going to change. So inside your UI, if you find any data is going to change on doing some action, then such data should come from state variable. So we should not hard code this data inside our component now. Like this, we should not hard code because this data is going to keep changing. So when some data is going to keep changing, now that data should come from the state variable. So how to get this data from the state variable. For that, first we required state variable. So to get that state variable, we required this function called useState. So first we will import useState function. Import useState function from React library. From React library. So how to import useState from React library? For that, go to your component. On the top, you have to write import, open curly braces, close curly braces from React library. So just you have to mention the name of your library called React. Now what you want to import from this library, use the state function. Now once you have imported, inside your component, remember inside your component, here you have to call this function. Just call it. So when you call this use state function, it returns one array. It returns one array. And that array contains exactly 2 elements. So if you know that one function is going to return one array, and if you know number of elements, then you can destructure it. You can simply destructure it. And here you can pass some variable names. I am passing variable name as a state and second variable name as a set state. Here you can pass whatever names you want. But always in the first variable, your state, like first variable will be state and second variable will be function. So inside this, some data will be stored, and inside this one function will be stored. Now inside this, if you want to store any data, then that data you can pass as an argument to use the state function. Suppose here if I am passing 100, now this 100 will go and store inside this variable. Now we can bind this variable with our JSX element. Suppose this is my span element. Here I want to bind that state variable, means already we know how to do that. Take curly braces and pass your variable name. So now whatever data you are storing in this state, that data will be visible on your screen. So here we have now 100. We have here something called 100. So instead of this like this, I can do one thing to make it more visible. Here I will display the count. I will remove this part. So here simply I will add state. Now you will see that we got here state as a 100. Now we can remove this. We don't require H3. We don't require this one. And margin bottom, I will add 20 pixel. Now see, 100 is visible on the screen. Whatever data you will store inside the state, that data will be visible. Suppose if I am storing string, now string will be visible. If I store here 0, 0 will be visible. So whatever data you will pass here, that data will go and store here. So I want to keep 0 inside this in the number format. So it will display 0. Now what we want, whenever we click on this button, we want to increase this count. So if you want to update this data here, then on click of this button, you just update your data in this state variable. You just update this variable, that's it. Our work is to update this state variable. React will take care of updating that data inside the UI. Now how to update this state variable? If you want to update the data inside the state variable, then you have to call this function. And to this function, whatever data you will pass as an argument, that data will be updated in your state, and then it will be updated in your UI also. Now I want to update some data here. If you click on this button, So in our React, if you want to add here event listener, then that event listener name we are going to follow as a camel case pattern. That event listener name we are going to follow in the camel case pattern. So in JavaScript, we write like this on click and we add double quotes. But in React, this C you have to make capital. And here instead of double quotes, we have to pass curly braces. And inside this curly braces, we have to just pass function name, which we want to call. So here I am passing one function name called increase count. Now I don't have this function called increase count. I will define that function here. So I'm creating one arrow function, define. Now, whenever you will click on this button, this function will be called. And whenever this function is called, inside this function, we will call this set state. And inside this set state, what we want? We want this count should increase. So the current data is 0. So current state, whatever you have, to that you just add 1. So what we are doing, whatever current state value we have, to that we are adding 1. Whatever value will be generated, what set state will do, that value it will update inside this state, and then it will update inside your UI also. In React, you have to remember one thing. Whenever we are passing here function name, we should not call the function. It is not allowed to call the function in React. So like this, we should not call. In JavaScript, we have to call, but in React, we should not call. We just need to pass the function name. It's like you are giving this function to React. So whenever you click on this button, React will call this function. And whenever this function is called, here you are calling set state. And inside that set state, you are accessing the current state value and adding 1 to it. So if I go back here, now if I click on this, I got here 1. Again, if I click 2, 3, 4, 5. So here, the simple logic what we are doing, on click of this button, we are calling one function and just calling the set state. And in that, we are writing the logic. Apart from that, nothing else we are doing. If you don't use React, if you use plain JavaScript, then what you have to do? First, on click of this button, you have to get the reference DOM element of h1. Then you have to create one count variable. You have to increase that count variable, and that count variable you have to append here. Means you have to write nearly 3-4 lines to do the same task. That is what we do in the React, in JavaScript. But in React, very simple. Just create one state variable, store some initial data, and whenever you want to update that data, call this set state. And that variable you bind with your UI. Whatever you will give to set state, that data will be updated. Suppose if I am giving here my name. Now you will see that whenever I click on the button, here Sagar will come. If I click on this button, Sagar will come. Whatever data you will give to your set state, that data will be updated on your UI, plus it will be updated in your state. So now here, suppose if I pass current state plus 100. Now you will see that on every button click, count will increase to 100. You can add whatever you want. I can multiply also. And then I can add some random value. You will see that if I refresh, some random value it is getting updated. Whatever you want, you can do. But right now, we just want to increase the count by 1. So we will say state plus 1. So if I refresh, now increase the count. So the concept is very simple. In your UI, if any data is going to be dynamic, means if it keeps changing on certain action, then such data should come from your state variable. Now here, when we are calling set state, two things will happen. So when we are calling set state function, the set state will do two things. This function will do two things. The first is it will update state variable value. It will update your state variable value. Second, it will update UI based on updated state value. Based on updated state value, it will update your UI. Updating UI is nothing but internally your React is doing DOM manipulation. And this process of updating UI, the process of updating UI based on updated state value is called re-rendering. What is re-rendering? So re-rendering of component is a process of updating UI based on current state data. Re-rendering of component is a process of updating UI based on current state data. So people will ask, what happens whenever we call set state? What happens when we call set state? Now, so many people we will stick with only one answer. They will say that it will update the state variable. That's it. But we should not say like that. We should say that whenever we call set state, it will first update the state variable, then it will re-render the component. It will re-render the component. Now, what is the meaning of re-rendering the component? Re-rendering the component is nothing but it is just updating our UI based on updated state value. That process we call as a re-rendering. So this term, remember, we are going to use so many times this term, re-rendering. Re-rendering is nothing but your UI is getting updated based on current state value. So here I can say that whenever I click on this button, my counter component got re-rendered. My component got re-rendered means my UI of the component got updated. Again re-rendered, again re-rendered, again re-rendered. So whenever your state value changes, re-rendering happens. Whenever state value changes, your re-rendering will get triggered. So re-rendering is not because of state. Re-rendering happens because of set state. Set state does re-rendering. So the logic of re-rendering, React people wrote inside the set state.
सर
Yeah.
आपने जो डोम बताया ना वो वही जावास्क्रिप्ट का डोम कॉन्सेप्ट है ना सर जिस तरह से ओके ओके
Okay. Clear guys, how to create state, how to update state, how to bind state. Let's take one more example. This time what I will do, inside same state hyphen concept folder, I will create one file called image c.jsx. Inside this, I will create one component. Inside this component, I will add one image tag with width value as 500, height value 300. Then I will use here break statement. And then I will add two buttons. The first button is something like ReactJS, and second button I will add here something like Angular, and here I will add NBSP. Okay. Now here by default I want to show React image. So I will go to my browser and I will search for React images. I will get some image here. I will take this image, right click, copy image link, and I will display here. So right now what I have done, if you see, I have just created one image and some break statements I have added and two buttons, and this NBSP I have used. It will just generate space between two buttons. And we are exporting it. Now if I go back to my app, and here if I import my image C component, and if I render here, it looks something like this. Okay, now here we need to add some CSS. So I will go with the inline CSS here.
Line number 11, spelling incorrect.
Now here I will just add 100 pixel and text align, I will say center. Now you will see that it looks something like this. So here anything mistake we are doing, here line number NBSP. Now we got, if you see here, we got one image and two buttons. Okay, this margin looks so much. Let's make it 50 pixel. Yeah. Now if you see, we are displaying one image and we have two buttons. Now my requirement is very simple. If I click on Angular, button, here I want to show Angular image. If I click on React button, then I want to show React image back. That is my requirement. It means now whenever you click on these buttons, this image should change. So if this image is going to keep changing on doing some action, then this image should come from state variable. So we should not hard code this URL. This URL should come from the state variable. So if this URL should come from the state variable means first we should have a state. So to have a state, first we have to import useState function from React library. And we can call that useState. We know that it returns one array. We can destructure that array. Now here we can use whatever names you want. This time I am using image, comma set image. And by default inside this variable, I want to store this URL. So I will copy this URL, remove from here, and I will add here. So whenever I pass something as an argument to useState, that data will go and store inside this variable. Now this entire URL will be stored inside this variable called image. Right now, if I save, there is you won't find any image on the screen. But here I want to show by default this image. So what we can do to this attribute, we can bind this state variable. So how to bind this state variable to this attribute? Remove this double quotes, add curly braces, and pass your state. Now you will see that image will be displayed. Now if user click on this Angular button, so whenever he click on this button, we will call one function called change to Angular. Now we don't have this function called change to Angular. Let's create here. So before return, you have to create. So const change to Angular. So I define one function. You can define normal function also. Instead of arrow, I can define normal named function also. This is also okay. So now if you click on this button, this function will be called. In this function, we should call this function called setImage. And to this setImage, you have to pass new URL. That's it. So if I go and search for Angular images, I will get a lot of images. I will take this image, right click, copy image link, go back, paste here. Now save it. Now you can go back here. You can refresh it. Now if I click on Angular, now we got Angular image. Now if I click on React, I want React image back. So what we are going to do, again on click of this button, I will call some other function. Change to React, I will say. If you want, you can handle in one function itself. But just to keep things simple, I am creating one more function. Change to React. Here also we have to call set state, this set image. And here we have to pass React image URL. So already we have here. So we will copy this URL and we will paste here. So what you are doing, you are just changing URLs inside the state variable. Now if I click on Angular, I got Angular. If I click on React, React. So we are able to make our UI dynamic now. Now here I want to show one title also. So before image, I want to show one title. H2 I will add. And by default, I want to show the title as a ReactJS. So here we got one title. And this title color, I will change to something like green. So you will see that you got here green color. So now my requirement is, if I click on Angular, here if I am showing Angular image, then title should change to Angular. If I click on React, it will show React image, then I want title React. So this title also I want to make dynamic. Now how to make this title dynamic? That is your assignment. So what you need to do, you think about it. Okay. So just one clue I will give. You can create any number of state variables. If I want, I can create one more state variable. Like this, I can create one more state variable. Like this, you can create any number of state variable, but just make sure this variable names you are not repeating. Like this, I can create any number of state variable. I can create one more. Here I can say state. Here I can say set state also. I can create like this any number of state variables. Okay, guys, clear?
Yes.
So today we will stop here, and then tomorrow I won't be available, guys. Tomorrow I'm traveling. So day after tomorrow I will take this session. Okay.
Okay.
So just work on this example state concept. So in next session, we will work on more examples. And in little bit depth, we will understand about this state. So some more points we need to understand about this concept that we will discuss.
Sure.
So from today's session, you